Hello, I'm Julianne. I'm an astrologer and I want to talk about the upcoming Mars retrograde. So, just in the last 48 hours, Mars has moved into the initial shadow period of this upcoming retrograde. And so it is time to start talking about it and to start recognizing that we are living it. So, the first thing actually that's coming to mind to offer you and to myself is to consider your own Mars placement in your chart above really anything else you're going to hear in this video or other videos. Um, Mars, archetypally speaking, is the leading edge of our lives. It's the leading edge of our evolutionary experience. If you are aligning with that paradigm of life, this cosmology that we are evolving and changing in life, Mars is the actor. Mars is the leading edge. Though that's the term that comes from evolutionary astrology from Jeffrey Wolf Green, and I quite like it. I quite like um, this idea also that Mars is the first visible place that we see Pluto manifest. So Pluto in evolutionary astrology is the core. It's the fundamental reference point as our bottom line desire, the bottom line reasoning for any one of us being here is encapsulated in the Pluto placement of anyone's birth chart. Where you look to see the very first manifestation of that desire being played out is Mars. So consider your own Mars signature, even just by sign and by house, because that's where you will always be vibrating. That's where you'll be resonating with where the transiting Mars is playing out, is transiting. So for me, for example, I have my natal Mars in Gemini and the third house. So, and it's on my IC on the very base of my chart. So words, talking, communication is really at the base of my self at the IC. I'm very emotionally connected to my words in a strange objective sense. I take action through my words for the most part. This is Mars and Gemini. Mars, again, the leading edge of our evolution in Gemini for me is about communication. And if you want to reference my Pluto, I have Pluto at 0 degrees of Sagittarius in the ninth house, which is fundamentally a signature that so deeply desires to understand all of the possible cosmologies that exist in the universe, all of the ways we can understand. Fundamentally, it's about natural law from a spiritual perspective, but I digress about myself here. I really encourage you to do the same, like apply the same to your own chart before you dive into what this particular Mars retrograde is going to bring up. So, like I did, consider the house placement, house and sign placement of Mars in your chart. Just think about it. And then think about that in reference to Pluto in your chart. And think about the relationship between Mars and Pluto. So for me, for example, my Mars and Pluto are in a very, very wide opposition to each other. And fundamentally, you can just understand and appreciate that Mars in Gemini wants to communicate, has a lot to move through communication about Pluto in Sagittarius, the meaning of life, different theologies, different cosmologies, different paradigms of understanding and ways to connect with natural law of the universe. And so thus here I am speaking about astrology, speaking about all the other things that I speak about here in my own very unique way. So how does your Mars interact with your Pluto in your chart is the first thing that I will speak to here, or rather encourage you to look at in your own chart. So take a moment to sit with that for yourself. Now, let's think about what's happening with the transiting Mars right now. So we have Mars transiting through the sign of Cancer right now, which is emotional action. Mars, the leading edge of our collective and individual evolutionary experience right now in transit, is pushing us to take our emotions very seriously, to move from our emotions, to be a leader of our own emotional experience. Mars has going into shadow in this sign of Cancer, deeply emotional, deeply intuitive, deeply connected to the past, to the storylines of our lives, to the places where we have to nurture ourselves and the places where we want to nurture others. Again, can also be about our home, our countries, our just all the places where we feel, again, deeply connected to. So on December 6th, so what is that? In 2 months from now, Mars will have moved into the sign of Leo and will station retrograde, which means Mars will appear as though it's going to move backwards in the sky. It'll station retrograde in the sign of Leo, like I said, so it'll move from Cancer into Leo. Mars in Leo is all about taking action from our creative self-concept. So the logic between the shift between Cancer and Leo is kind of once you've come into an emotional identification with yourself, then you know how to, or rather, you know from where you will shine the most brightly. Leo is about just the radiant self concept and the radiant creative self creation that is able to be seen, wants to be seen, and that by being seen, it actually gives light to others. It's the raw creative emotional, well, it's the raw creative process that in its most aligned form, in my understanding, is connected to a deep coherence within your emotional, within one's emotional body, so that you can feel confident to share yourself, share your light. So when Mars shifts between Cancer and Leo, we're on this journey of I'm leading my emotional body here so that eventually I know where to take action to enjoy the process of being myself, which is very Leo. Um, I'm taking action to really know myself emotionally so that I can shine as brightly as possible, so that all of my actions can help boost my confidence. The thing is, Mars will start to move retrograde. So December 6th into January, into February, Mars will be moving backwards through Leo and through Cancer. So we are doing Mars work the opposite way now. The retrograde function, as taught by the evolutionary astrology school, Jeffrey Wolf Green teachings, are, the retrograde functions are always thought of as an acceleration of consciousness and an acceleration of evolution. So instead of it being about things not working or things going in the wrong direction, it's actually the way I think about it, and the way I appreciate and understand any retrograde signature, is that you're actually moving faster by moving inwards. So I'm sure we've all heard and appreciate this idea that you have to change the inside before you can see a shift on the outside, which I tend to believe for the most part, although I think when we do form habits on the outside, eventually that will change the inside. because the world kind of works in a mirror. But um, in any case, going inwards first is often the harder journey, both emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, physically, to plunge into the depths of yourself first. Again, yeah, it's usually the more effortful journey, but it is a little quicker if you can fully commit to it. And I don't think that that idea of needing to fully commit to it should be taken as some, you know, you gotta commit to it or you're not gonna do it. No, like I think we're all really on our own timeline with how much inner work we do and the pacing of that internal direction or the changing of that internal direction. So when Mars is moving from Leo into Cancer in its retrograde motion between December 6th and February 23rd of this year, we are closing our eyes in Leo and seeing how bright can we still shine with our eyes closed inside? How radiant can we be? What do we need to do for ourselves in order to feel our own warmth? And sometimes what that can feel like in life itself is a moving backwards in time or a reconsideration of the past or a revisiting of past decisions. It could also be a revisiting of past, in Leo, past creative works, past, relationships to your creative self, your creative body of work, or just anything in your life that you feel is a creative effort. Once it goes into Cancer, that shift we realize is that in order to deeply reconsider the creative work that we do, we need to deeply reconsider our creative self concept and thus our emotional body. We need to, or rather, are invited to revisit. And with Mars, it's really incisive, it's really physical, it's really cutting. It's not Mercury retrograde. I keep using these words, reconsider, etc. They're very mind words, but appreciate my Mars is in Gemini. And so the Mercury Mars functions for me are very similar, but I digress. In Mars, archetypally speaking, in Leo, we could be truly, this is like the image of cutting up an old painting into a bunch of pieces and rearranging it to understand it differently, to understand yourself differently. Um, in Cancer, once it moves into Cancer, this is like how else? I just have this really visceral metaphor image in my brain of like a C-section happening. That's like we need to take surgical action in order to continue this lineage. There's something that needs a reconsidered approach to go back in because something else wasn't working in the way that we expected it to. In Cancer, this is also about protecting, reconsidering our, again, for me, I keep using this word reconsidering. I really urge you to look at your own Mars placement because that's going to color so much of how you interact with this Mars. You can see for me how much my Mars in Gemini comes. But Mars at its best to me is about where we can lead ourselves into right action. And in Cancer, it's all about where we are leading ourselves into the right stewardship of our emotional body, of our emotional energy. So by February 23rd, Mars will be at the same point in the sky that it is basically today, October 7th, October 6th. And on February 23rd, it will start moving direct once more in the sign of Cancer. And then it'll be moving direct again, for another, gosh, 2.5 years. Is that right? I believe that's right. So this period of retrograde, I don't see it as bad or wrong. I really see it as necessary. I see it as the natural cycles that we go through in life. I see it as a reflection of the nonlinearity of our stories, of our consciousness. And I'm really excited about this Mars retrograde, specifically because it's in the sign of Cancer, and specifically also because it sees us shift into Pluto, the Mars is already in shadow, and Pluto will already have moved into Aquarius for good by the time that Mars goes retrograde on December 6th. Um, but Mars right now is already in shadow. Pluto is still at this 29th degree of Capricorn. And there are so many other significant changes that are happening in 2025, just right around the beginning of the year, February. I don't have the exact dates right now, but I'm very, very, it is the nodes are changing signs in the first few months of the year. Later in the year, Uranus is going to shift, I believe. Saturn and Neptune are both going to shift and be in and out of Aries and Pisces. And so this Mars is bridging us into 2025. I want to believe in an incredibly compassionate way. That's because it's asking us to take emotional leadership in our lives as well as creative leadership in our lives. Mars will be opposing Pluto. I don't have the exact dates for this, but Mars will be opposing Pluto throughout its retrograde journey at 29 degrees Capricorn, 29 degrees Cancer and 0 degrees Leo. And the Mars Pluto opposition is always extraordinary. If you think of the Pluto polarity point I've spoken to in other videos, and how the polarity point of Pluto is where we are doing the integrative work of the Pluto deep soul work. The integrative work is always emotional work. And so we're very well acquainted with that in Cancer since 2008, as Cancer is the polarity point to Capricorn, Pluto's staying Capricorn. But as Pluto moves into Aquarius after November, very soon, next month, the polarity point is going to be in Leo. And so we are going to be back in another 20-year cycle of, this is still relatively new for us, but it is a 20-year cycle where we are fielding and integrating the emotions that come up as Pluto is doing its thing in Aquarius. We are integrating the Aquarius changes in the sign of Leo, which again is the sign of our creative, radiant self concept, our creative process. So, this interplay, these actions that are needing to be taken and taken again in Leo and in Cancer throughout this Mars retrograde are going to be fully visible. And I believe the way I see this is it's a wonderful way to begin the Pluto and Aquarius journey and all the changes that are happening next year, grounding us in a deeper connection to our emotions stewarding our emotions more skillfully and more coherently so that we can have a more direct and similarly more masterful approach when it comes to our creative expression, because creative expression over the next 20 years will become, it'll become the seat of our personal power in a way that it hasn't before. The more technology takes up space in our world, the more we're going to be wanting to understand our own purpose as humans, which is a very dynamic, creative thing, very unique for each of us, but it is a fundamentally creative thing, which is a Leo archetype, creativity. The opposition that I'm speaking to here in this Mars retrograde, any opposition always speaks to two archetypes kind of looking at each other. And if we think about what I said with this Mars Pluto relationship, fundamentally, Mars being the leading edge of Pluto, the leading edge of our evolution, and the first kind of visible placement of Pluto's work when they're in opposite signs to each other, whether that's Cancer Capricorn or Aquarius Leo. We are up against some power, some authority that we are externalizing in our lives. I'm not saying that's bad or a good thing. It doesn't really matter. It just is. Pluto archetypes are kind of everywhere in our lives. But when Mars comes to oppose Pluto in the sky as a transit, it's a very intense time for questioning of personal agency and personal power. So in Cancer, that personal agency is emotional, it's protective. In Leo, it's creative, and it has to do with, again, our self concepts. It can also be, both of these signs are very personal, Leo and Cancer. They're very individual, they're very personal. That's just what it is. One is ruled by the moon and the other is ruled by the sun, are two luminaries, right? So even though Leo is more fiery, masculine, a little bit more resilient, I would say, than Cancer. Cancer's resilient in its own powerful, nonlinear, watery yin way, but Leo is just, it'll burn you up. It'll burn itself up if it needs to. So it's a little bit more combustive, whereas Cancer can just kind of be drowned out by itself and its emotional experience. And so when Mars, which is the leading edge of whatever we're doing, comes to oppose Pluto in Capricorn or Pluto in Aquarius, Pluto's this deep holding pattern of power, holding power of like concentrated energy that we are all referencing consciously and unconsciously. Mars is Mars is consciousness. Mars is what we are doing now. And so we have to reckon with how our current actions and behaviors are squaring up, or rather facing off with the powers that be, and how the powers that be show up in our life, because it's going to show up very differently for everyone. So there's probably much more to this that I could speak about, and I haven't even brought up the charts, but this signature of Mars opposing Pluto is very, very, very significant. And I can get specific dates for that and put it in the description of this video. But I think it's powerful to just reflect on for yourself. Look at where these positions are falling in your chart. So the Cancer Leo cusp, where is that in your chart? And again, I really highly encourage you to think about your own Mars Pluto placements and how you feel about that. Do you feel confident about your ability to act in the world, to take action on your impulses? Do you trust yourself? Are you coherent with it? And I want to, I believe that most of us are pretty coherent with it, but I think a lot of this Mars retrograde, especially the fact that it's turning retrograde in the sign of Leo, for many people, this comes to a question of confidence in the truth of our own personal actions as they are necessarily being measured against Pluto, which is like a transpersonal, intergenerational power source. So it's hard to hold both. And I don't think the point here is to try to convince ourselves that we are both Pluto and Mars at the same time, although we are. Um, it's to let the storyline play out and to really be Mars, to play the role that Mars is asking of us, where Mars is transiting in our chart, as well as where Mars was when we were born. Really, really paying attention to all of the signatures right now is very, very helpful. So, final example for me is that my sun is at 17 degrees Cancer. So, Mars is pretty much exactly on my sun right now. Um, there has definitely been a cutting into myself, but also into my family line. And not only that, but I have not felt more um, empowered or more as though it has never felt more necessary for me to push and like promote this art school that I have started. I call it Chainsaw School, which is a funny, very Martian name, but I will include links to my school and to the offering that I'm excited to be sharing for this month of October. It is a free offering that you can follow along with and use to start practicing this Leo, just the creative process of whatever the truth is for you. So there are also some live meetings that I will be hosting. The first one is free. It is this Wednesday um, at two different time zones. And then um, there will be more meetings later on in the month at a sliding scale payment rate. So please check it out if any of this has felt resonant, if you're still listening. Um, creative self-expression is sometimes I believe it's a even more direct way to understand yourself and what's going on than even astrology. I think using them in tandem is wonderful, but sometimes we need to drop even the logic of the stars and work with what is so present and what we are authoring into our lives beyond the logic of language, beyond the logic of any one way of making art. The way that I hold this space is very expansive, and it assumes that you as someone who can make something, you have a full logic to yourself. You have a full creative logic that it's just unfolding, and all that I am doing is holding space to witness its unfolding and to reflect the logic of your own language back to you. So please check it out if you're interested. Um, Thank you so much for listening. If you've stuck around this far, let me know in the comments. I have a lot of availability this month. I would love to do some readings for people. So do check out my website. And that's all for now. Thank you so much.